Good day, everybody. I hope that you're well and also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today, we'll be doing our grade 1 English lesson on adjectives. And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. Once you've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of English language arts. We're doing grade 1. And then we're going to scroll down up until we get to our chapter of adjectives. So this is a continuation of our previous lesson on adjectives. So today we're going to just continue with adjectives, right? So our chapter is adjectives. Our subject is English language arts. We're doing grade 1. And the lessons that we are going to be focusing on under the chapter of adjectives it's, does the adjective tell you what kind or how many? We're going to use sense words and we're going to identify adjectives. All right. So when it comes to an adjective, right? Adjectives, it tells us more about a noun. Adjectives tells us more about nouns. And nouns are basically names of people. It tells us about animals, places, or things, right? So which means that an adjective isn't a word that tells us about a person. It tells us about a place or it tells us about different things. And when it comes to adjectives, right, that tells us about a person, it tells us about animals, places, or things. Some adjectives, they tell you what kind. So some adjectives, they tell you what kind. And adjectives, it tells us what kind. It will tell us what kind of person it is. It will tell us what kind of place it is, what kind of animal it is, or what kind of thing it is. And if we look at an example of adjectives that tells us what kind of person it is, what kind of animal it is, what kind of place, or what kind of thing it is. An example is Tom sees a big truck. So Tom sees a big truck. So when it comes to adjectives, it tells you what kind. And then we basically have to ask ourselves, what kind of truck? So Tom sees a big truck. The question is, what kind of truck? Yes. So which means that purple is the adjective. It describes, it tells us what kind of basketball um Eli as Ella has. So in this case, we can say Tom sees a big truck. So big is our adjective because it tells us what kind of truck Tom has. Another example is we have a red bull. We have a red bull. So now the question is, what kind of bull do you have? So we have a red bull. What kind of bull do you have? And if we were to select our adjective, then we would say that we have a red bull. So red is our adjective or the adjective that tells us what kind of bull we have. So basically, when it comes to adjectives that tell us what kind, you need to basically ask yourself, you identify the noun and you ask what kind of noun it is, what kind of person it is, what kind of animal it is, what kind of place or what kind of thing it is. Because the adjective, it tells us about that noun. So it tells us about that noun, about that person, about that animal, about the place, or about the thing. It describes that noun. So basically, red is the adjective that describes the ball. So red is the adjective that describes the ball. So yes, so basically only red is the adjective because that basically describes the ball. It tells us what kind of ball. And then when it comes to adjectives, right? Some adjectives they also tell us how many. So some adjective tells us what kind, like we just made an example of, and then some of our adjectives they tell us how many. And it says Kim sees two trees. So with adjectives, right? Remember we are still basically describing the noun, or the adjective is still a word that tells us about the person, which is the noun, or the noun, which is the person, animal, place, or thing. So we have adjectives that tells us how many. So when it comes to how many, right? Then it tells us either how many people there are, how many animals there are, how many places, or how many things. It doesn't have to specifically be a number as in 1 to 10. It can be, for example, where you use words like many, you use words like a lot. But for now, we're just going to focus on, for example, saying how many animals or how many people or how many things or how many places there are. And an example is Kim sees two trees. Kim sees two trees. What is the adjective within that sentence? Kim sees two trees. What is the adjective that tells us how many? What do you think is the adjective that tells us how many? And we can then say Kim sees two trees. So now the question is, how many trees do you see? Two trees. So two is our adjective. Yes, well done. So two. So only two. So only the word two is the adjective. So two is our adjective. Well done. I have three dogs. I have three dogs. What is the adjective within that sentence? I have three dogs. So I have three dogs. What is our adjective within that sentence? Remember our adjective, right? It tells us about the noun. It tells us about the noun, right? So in this case, the adjectives are telling us how many of that noun there is. Yeah, it says, I have three dogs. How many dogs do you have? So how many dogs do you have? And if we were to select the adjective, right, that tells us how many dogs there are, we can say there are three dogs. So three is our adjective because it tells us how many dogs there are. So we said once again, an adjective, it tells about a person, an animal, a place, or a thing. It describes that person. It describes that animal, that place, or thing. And we have adjectives that tells you what kind, and we have adjectives that tells us how many. So now we also see that an adjective is a word that tells about a person, animal, place, or thing. And some of the adjective, right, they tell you how a noun looks. It tells you how a noun sounds. It tells us how a noun tastes, how it smells, or how it feels. That is to do with our senses. So we have our five senses, which is to do with seeing, with hearing, tasting, smelling, and touching. And if we look at an example, right, of adjectives that either tell us how the noun looks, how the noun sounds, how the noun tastes, or how the noun smells or feels. All right, so now we're looking at the first example. The sun looks bright. The sun looks bright. What is the adjective within that sentence? The sun looks bright. We need to identify the adjective. And we can then, if we were to identify the adjectives that either tell us about how the noun looks, sounds, tastes, smells, or feels, then we can say it looks bright. So bright is our adjective. The next one says the drum sounds loud. We need to say how the drum sounds. We need to say how the drum sounds. So we can then say the drum sounds loud. So loud is the adjective that tells us how the drum sounds. And the next one says, these cookies taste sweet. These cookies taste sweet. How does the cookies taste? How does the cookies taste? And then the air smells fresh. The air smells fresh. How does the air smell? The air smells fresh. How does the air smell? So fresh and sweet, that is our adjectives. And then lastly, our it says my hair feels soft. So now the question is, how does your hair feel? My hair feels soft. So basically, we will then say that soft, it tells us how the hair feels. And once again, an adjective, it tells us about a noun, it tells us about a person, it tells us about an animal, place, or thing. We can also say it describes that person, it describes that animal, describes the place, or describes the thing. And our adjectives, they tell us what kind, and they tell us how many. They tell us what kind of animal, what kind of person, what kind of place, what kind of thing this is. And they also tell us how many of the nouns there are. And then we also said we have adjectives, right? That tell us how something looks, how something sounds, how something tastes, smells, or feels. All right. So now we're going to we're going to aplusstudents.ca, and we're going to the lesson that says, does the adjective tell us what kind, or does it tell us how many? So tell us, does it tell us what kind, or does it tell us how many? And here we have even like a visual example of our adjectives. What kind of animals it is, what kind of truck, what kind of ball, as well as how many. How many trees? How many dogs? All right. So now we're going to our test. We're going to say if the adjective tells us how many, or if it tells us what kind. Are we still okay? Am I going too fast? Do we understand what an adjective is before I continue? So it says, look at the adjective in bold. So this word in bold. We need to say, does it tell us what kind or does it tell us how many? So does the sentence tell us what kind or how many? It says a long road. A long road. Does it tell us what kind of road? Or does it tell us how many roads? So does it tell us option one, what kind, or option two, how many? A long road. Oh, guys, I can't see messages coming in. Let me see. Ah, all right. Yeah, I see it now. All right, and if we were to say what kind or how many, what type of adjective it is, a long road, then yes, we can say a long road tells us option one, what kind of road it is. So what kind of road? Yes, that is what I'm saying. This is a continuation of the previous lesson on adjectives. So what kind of road it is? Well done. The next one says some painters. Some painters. So the word some, does it tell us what kind of painters it is? Or does it tell us how many painters there are? So some painters, when it comes to adjectives, it tells us how many. It can be one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine, 10, or it can be some, or it can be many, it can be a lot. So some painters, does it tell us what kind of painters, or does it tell us how many painters? All right, and if we were to select our option, we can say some painters tells us how many painters. How many painters? All right. The next one says a new bike. New. So the word new. A new bike. So option two was correct. The next one says a new bike. New. Does it tell us what kind of bike it is? Or does it tell us how many bikes there are? What kind of books? What kind of bike? Or how many bikes? So a new bike. Does it tell us what kind of bike? Option one. Or how many bikes? Option two. And if we were to select the type of bike it is, the new bike, we will say, what kind of bike? It is a new bike. Yes, well done. Option one is correct. It's a new bike. Tells us what kind of bike it is. And a short ride. A short ride. So short. Does it tell us what kind of ride it is, or does it tell us how many rides there is? Short ride. What kind of ride or how many ride? Short. And if we were to select the type of ride, a short ride, does it tell us what kind of ride or does it tell us how many rides? A short ride. right. And the word in bold, right? Short. It tells us what kind of ride. Yes, well done. Option one, what kind of ride? It is a short ride. Well done. And then the last one, funny stories. The word funny. Funny stories. Does it tell us what kind of stories somebody tells, or does it tell us how many stories somebody tells? What kind? Option one, stories, or how many stories? This is the last one. So, what kind of stories? Option one, or how many stories? Option two. And if we were to select the correct option, we will say, what kind of stories? Meaning it was funny stories. All right. So, this is now the end of our lesson on adjectives. We said adjectives are words that tells us more about the noun. It is adjectives that tell us more about people, places, animals, or things, right? And an adjective, right, it also tells us what kind, and it tells us how many, right? So what kind of noun, how many of that nouns. It's the same as saying what kind of person, what kind of place, what kind of animal, what kind of thing. And the same with how many. So you need to ask yourself how many people, how many places, how many things, how many animals, right? Because we are basically describing or telling us about the noun. All right, so this is the end of our lesson on adjectives. Thank you very much, grade ones, for joining the class, and I really hope that you are going to have a good day further. So, till next time, goodbye.